The silent majority is standing up to jerks. President Trump allegedly knew Russia was putting bounties on American soldiers. And Justice John Roberts delivers another deadly blow to the Constitution. Hello, I'm Mike Huckabee with The Breakdown. Well, it's taken long enough, but I'm starting to sense a shift in the wind as the silent majority are getting a little sick of staying silent. All the time, America-hating jerks smash national monuments. Immediately after President Trump signed an executive order requiring the enforcement of the federal law against vandalizing public statues and monuments, the Justice Department announced indictments of 4 men in connection with the attempts to topple the statue of Andrew Jackson in Lafayette Square in Washington. The Department of Justice rightly drew a line between lawful protest and vandalism, stating, "This office remains steadfast in its commitment to protect the sacred First Amendment right of individuals to peacefully protest. But these charges should serve as a warning to those who choose to desecrate the statues and monuments that adorn our nation's capital. Your violent behavior and criminal conduct will not be tolerated." I feel fairly certain that the idea of facing consequences for their actions is going to be a completely new experience for some of these folks, and one that their parents should have introduced them to long ago. They were among 15 people whose photos were tweeted by President Trump and whom the DOJ is searching for. Naturally, some liberal media outlets accuse President Trump of inciting violence by tweeting their wanted posters. Well, here's a little advice. If you don't want to be the subject of a federal manhunt, then don't do things that put your face on wanted posters, like trying to smash national monuments. This seems like one of those "you knew the job was dangerous when you took it" situations. Well, President Trump isn't the only one who's fed up with allowing rampant crime and destruction in the streets under the guise of protesting racism. In Oklahoma City, DA David Prater announced charges of terrorism, rioting, and assault against some of the protesters who turned violent in May. He said, "This is not Seattle. We're not putting up with this lawlessness here." And in Manassas, Virginia, a different kind of protest occurred when hundreds of people turned out for a Back the Blue march to support the police. Participants called it disgusting to tar every police officer because of what some bad cops elsewhere did, and said police might need better training or background checks for hiring. But as for defunding the police, who in their right mind would even think that's a good idea? In fairness, I don't think being in your right mind has anything to do with that particular movement. The growing backlash is not against legitimate protesters who have genuine concerns about police behavior toward blacks. It's against the radical left extremists from groups like Antifa, many of them young white adults from privileged backgrounds who were indoctrinated into socialism and hating America when they were in college, now who are exploiting the anger over George Floyd's death as a convenient excuse to attack the foundations of the country. And among the silent majority who are against the defund police movement are a lot of black citizens. Ami Horowitz put out a great video recently where he interviewed a bunch of white people and asked them their thoughts on the police, juxtaposed their answers with several residents of Harlem. Take a look.
How much better off would the black community be if we dismantled the police?
I think infinitely, honestly.
How much better off would we all be?
Policing in this country is about keeping black people down.
They're monsters.
What do you think of the people who say, "Oh, your community will be better off if there was no police"? What do you say to
I
that?
think they're full of crap.
I think they're being somewhat ignorant.
It'd be worse than what it is.
What be happening?
Abolishing the NYPD, that'd be suicide.
We need them here.
And I think they're invested in the community.
But while these leftists aren't helping the black community, they are actively harming it. And they frankly just don't care. And not just by tarnishing the image of legitimate peaceful protesters. Their riots, arson, and looting are destroying black-owned businesses and black people's jobs, eliminating needed goods and services, and making black neighborhoods less safe by driving the police out. Well, I didn't address this story when it came out on Friday because I have a standard rule that any shocking blockbuster anti-Trump story that comes from the hostile media outlets, such as the New York Times, ought to be allowed to sit and air out for at least 48 to 72 hours, just to give truth a chance to bubble up. Since this story came out more than 3 days ago, I guess it's safe to mention it. The New York Times, citing its favorite source, unnamed officials, reported that Russia offered bounties to Taliban-backed militants in order to kill U.S. troops in Afghanistan to drive out the U.S. from the region, and that the president was briefed on it. Joe Biden, picking up the softball handed him by the Times, declared this. He said, "The truly shocking revelation that if the Times report is true, and I emphasize that again, is that President Trump, the commander-in-chief of American troops serving in a dangerous theater of war, has known about this for months, according to the Times, and has done worse than nothing." Democrats and the media, but of course I repeat myself, screamed that President Trump was guilty of Russian collusion. I wonder if they ever get tired of doing that. And even some top Republicans are demanding an investigation. They really need to learn just how to count to 100 before taking anything seriously that comes from the New York Times. So here's what we know after waiting a couple of days. Russia called the story fake, and the Taliban denied there was any truth to it. Neither of those things may cut any ice with you, but President Trump also tweeted that the intelligence agencies reported to him that they did not brief him or the vice president on this because they didn't find the info credible. And by the way, that was before they saw it in the New York Times. Well, I can't finish this story without mentioning there's a new movie coming out about the time in the 1930s when the New York Times won a Pulitzer Prize for fake news covering up atrocities committed by Russian tyrant Joseph Stalin, an award they never returned. Now that is Russia collusion. Well, you may have kept up with the rulings of the Supreme Court this week, one of which is an incredibly disappointing one. Our liberal Supreme Court, with John Roberts siding with the liberals, decided to strike down a Louisiana law that made it necessary for an abortion doctor to have hospital privileges so that if something went wrong, the patient could actually be admitted to the hospital and that there would be a level of accountability. It was a shocking decision in many ways on the part of the court, although I try not to be shocked by what the Supreme Court might do. It once again points up that even though this law had passed in a bipartisan manner in Louisiana, with a number of Democrats voting for it and a Democrat governor signing it, that still wasn't enough for the Supreme Court because they really do like being legislators more than they like being members of the judicial branch. I would say to them, if you really want to legislate, hang up that black robe, go out and run for Congress, and then you can legislate. But the Constitution does not give you the authority or the power to make legislation from the bench. I know that, and I'm not a Supreme Court justice. It's a real shame that some of those who are don't seem to understand it. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed our video because then you'll maybe consider subscribing to the channel below and clicking the notification bell. Be sure and leave a like and a comment as well. And if you want more of my news analysis and commentary, you can sign up for my newsletter on MikeHuckabee.com. Hey, it's completely free. Absolutely, completely free. That's it for this edition of The Breakdown. I'm Mike Huckabee.